Welcome everyone to our Indigenous Veterans Day ceremony. First of all, I need to take responsibility for the slide. 2022, it is not, but I was having trouble with one of the pictures and I was like, oh, just throw it into a slideshow at lunchtime today. That's what happens when you don't prepare. So, lesson learned. At least the November 8th is right. Okay, so before we get started, I'd just like to introduce some people. So we have a speaker with us today, Nelson Spence. Ms. Ponask, who you know will do the opening prayer. We have some students who will be doing poems. We have Jesselyn Spence, Lee Langshire, and Braden Patterson. And we have a couple of cadets joining us as well. We have Janessa Okamau and Alexis Lafreniere. So to get started, we are going to do O Canada, or A Canada in Cree. It's not in Cree. But please stand. Please be seated. Now I'd like to welcome Madeline Ponask to the mic to do the opening prayer.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to I think this is our third Aboriginal Veterans, our fifth Aboriginal Veterans ceremonies. I'm glad to see you all here, and thank you for removing all your hats and being very respectful. I'm gonna start with our opening prayers. I was gonna say something, but I'm not going to. So, can you please stand, remove your hats, and bow your heads. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Why we have Indigenous Veterans Day is something that we have to be aware of. Before I begin what I have prepared for you, I just want you to understand that on the road to reconciliation, education is key. The more you know, the more you grow. I say it all the time in my classes, and it means more now than it ever has before. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the first observance of Indigenous Veterans Day. On November 8th, 1994, the first historical observance was held in Winnipeg. Hey, good things start in Manitoba. Yes, for sure. The founder of this movement was spurred on by 3 Indigenous veterans who felt they did not have any voice to recognize their historical accomplishments on and off the battlefield. Ms. Gage was the founding secretary-treasurer of the Manitoba Aboriginal Veterans Association on August 8th, 1992. Later in 1992, Indigenous veterans from across Canada gathered in Ottawa to establish the National Aboriginal Veterans Association. And Ms. Gage was elected as the charter vice president. A woman. A woman. I want you to understand that. Okay? It was through this process that these men felt it was necessary to pursue the recognition of our Indigenous veterans. Gage was asked if this was another Remembrance Day, and her response was simple. November 8th gave our Indigenous veterans time to find their uniforms, polish their boots, get together and head on to the November 11th events with their comrades. It was a way for the community to celebrate and recognize their contributions. It is important for us to understand why their continued recognition is vitally important to recognize as we move towards reconciliation. Some of the accomplishments of Indigenous veterans in the past included providing scout and sniping services for our troops. Their bush skills led them to a unique position with the military where their bush skills came in handy on the battlefield, including their expert marksmanship. We also use Cree language, much like the Navajo language, as a code talk. In other words, we disguise what we were doing on the battlefield by using Cree language, the same language we're teaching in our school, to dupe the Germans, and they had no idea, no way to decipher what was being said. And lastly, their ultimate sacrifice of their lives and the protection of their homelands. It is important to understand that many Indigenous veterans face these decisions when in the service. One, if you wanted to spend time with your fellow troops outside of duty, you had to sign away your treaty rights. Government policy. Two, if you use the free university offered to veterans, you would have to surrender your treaty rights. Many men had to allow for their pay to be absorbed by the Indian agents of the time in their community, as it was illegal for possession of currency for Indigenous people until 1953. None of these expectations were placed on other soldiers in our forces. Thanks to the efforts of the National Aboriginal Veterans Association, the recognition of Indigenous service is a nationally recognized day of observance for our nation. This is a result of people planning for change, realizing the important role that people played to help our young country stand on its 2 feet during the 2 world wars. This made Canada a well-respected country around the world. As Ms. Gage stated, it's very important to remember, honor, and respect the efforts of our soldiers on both Indigenous Veterans Day and Remembrance Day. It was their sacrifices that allowed us to remain a free country. Today, I ask for your humble respect and attention as we remember their efforts, accomplishments, and sacrifices. Thank you.
Hello, bonjour. I am joining you from the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Today and every day, we reaffirm our commitment to meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. On November 8th, Canadians come together to commemorate Indigenous Veterans Day, and for over 200 years, Indigenous people have been and continue to be an integral part of Canada's military history. From the World Wars to the Korean War, to countless United Nations missions, Indigenous service members have made outstanding contributions to Canada, often by using their own specialized skills as scouts, snipers, and code talkers. Despite their service and sacrifice during these conflicts, many Indigenous veterans endured hatred and systemic racism while they served. And when they returned to Canada, they did not always receive the same benefits, honors, or respect as non-Indigenous veterans. In 1994, Indigenous veterans held the first Aboriginal Veterans Day so that Indigenous veterans could receive the recognition that they deserve. Thanks to the tireless advocacy of Indigenous veterans and their loved ones, National Indigenous Veterans Day has grown and is now celebrated right across the country. And although we have made progress in highlighting the achievement of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis veterans, we still have a long way to go. I want to encourage all Canadians to learn more about Indigenous contributions to our military history. Today, tomorrow, and every day, we salute the legacy and achievements of Indigenous veterans and armed forces members. Together, let us honor their service, remember their sacrifices, and share their stories so that they may never be forgotten. Thank you. Merci, Megwich, Narkumik. Bonjour.
Bonjour. At this time, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker for today, Mr. Nelson Spence. He resides in Split Lake, Manitoba, Tatasquat Cree Nation, and he is an honor veteran. At this time, I'd like to welcome Mr. Nelson Spence.
Danse. Nelson Spence is the other one. Manachihus is my Cree name. As my grandfather gave me the Cree name. As in English, it's Little Lamb. My services in the Canadian Armed Forces started off back in 1977. I just got out of the residential school. I'm a day school, residential school survivor. And how I got into the armed forces was that getting back in my community was Split Lake was a fly-in community. It was isolated. There was no highway accessibility to connect Split Lake with the outside world. In the spring of '77, I managed to fly out of Split Lake and start hitchhiking to certain parts of the northern communities like Snow Lake, Flin Flon, Lynn Lake, the Paw, looking for a job, looking for work. It was then that once I have not decided to head back to Split Lake, that the Indian Affairs office was in Churchill Building. I went there to go see them if they could help me fly back to Split. And while I was there was a recruiting officer there. I sat down, talked with him, and showed him that he got me to do an aptitude test in '77. I passed that, and that's where my services started. I ended up left Split Lake to go to Cornwallis, Nova Scotia. Did a 15-week recruiting training there. And while I was there, I met other participants from different parts of Canada, mostly from the east and Newfoundland area, Nova Scotia. And after I was done there, I ended up going to Wainwright, Alberta, to do a more specialized training with the Canadian Armed Forces. And once that was done, I got stationed in Victoria, BC, and kept on work barracks. I did my time and traveled in different parts of Canada, in the States. They're doing some warfare exercises. And the experience I learned from there, it's very rewarding in terms of life skills and so forth, in terms of strategies of learning about leadership. And once I was out of the armed forces, after a few years of service there in the armed forces, when I got back to Split Lake, I got utilized what I learned in getting employed with as an auxiliary band constable. With that lady there, I managed to work with the emergency services, get the ambulance and the fire department going, and get it all started with fully serviced with level 1 training and first responders training. And with that, I also got into counseling and politics of 8 years, in which, in that, we managed to get 60 units, and also to incorporate the training, community employment training in that, and preparation for the upcoming employment opportunities with Kiosk, hydro development. And but along the way, it wasn't all glamorous. I went through some of my own personal struggles and during my journey, which I come to work in the health services with working on with addictions, recovery, and that's for the in traumas. Thank you. Yeah. While being in the services, like I said, I met a lot of good friends. I'm still in with them. One of my fellow friends that came into Split Lake during where we had a trade show in the community. The Canadian Armed Forces was there for doing their recruiting. We managed to sit down and talk together, and he's now a captain working at the recruiting officers out of Winnipeg. And the rewards there are good. You get to travel, and when you're traveling with and during the armed forces, you get paid for it. They pay you to serve where you go. I had an option of going into Navy or infantry. I chose infantry because it looked like very similar to my life's experience living in the reserve and hunting and trapping with my grandfather. So with that, my background, it was a little bit easier when we went out for winter exercises because we were out northern BC and in Wainwright during the winter. And also learning how to use the armored vehicles and certain strategies of deploying into a maneuver. So that's just to be what I can touch on with what I've learned while I was in the services. Thank you. I wish I could say more to this. Thank you very much for listening.
I would like to welcome Jessalyn Spence to the mic, and she's going to read Soldier's Poem, which she also wrote.
No, I can't. Kiskise kisekao, kenanas kumetinan uche, kepa kitiniso winawao, miswa kanak ekwa simma kanisak, uche payataki ayowin uche depue ne misowen, kiskisi ekwa kistenemuwen, kaki simma kanisi wichek ekat kita wana kiskisiak. We thank you for your sacrifices, wounded warriors and soldiers, for peace, for freedom. Remember and honor veterans, lest we forget.
Okay, next up we have Braden Patterson and Lee Lankshire. They'll be reading Remembrance Day poem written by, oh, not written by, okay. Oh, Cadence, it is written by you? Okay. Perfect.
Ge nanas kometinan sama kanasak, oche kepa gitinasowen, ge gestinamowen, gesago chehewewen, eka gita wana gesiak, oge sama kanasak, inanowe sama kanasak ga wiche ya kanatuchik.
We thank you, soldiers, for your sacrifice, your honor, your victory. Lest we forget the soldiers, Indigenous soldiers, our allies.
Canadian Armed Forces stationed at Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt. I joined the military for the adventure and to be a part of something bigger than myself. From a young age, I always felt a pull towards leadership and the desire to make a significant impact. The thought of contributing to a cause greater than my own personal ambitions was a powerful motivator. I knew that pursuing a career in the armed forces would allow me to potentially change lives and provide support to those who are suffering. During Veterans Week, I take time to remember the bonds of friendship and the moments of solidarity that define our service. There is a unique camaraderie among those who serve, a bond forged in both the quiet moments of preparation and the intense times of action. In 2020, I served on Operation Neon, a mission dedicated to supporting the United Nations efforts to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Contributing to this mission is incredibly important to me, as it directly impacts global security and the safety of future generations. The dedication and collaboration required for such a critical mission exemplify the core values of the Canadian Armed Forces and our commitment to international peace and stability. One particularly poignant memory from my service is from a deployment on Operation Projection in 2017. During this deployment, I visited the museum in Hiroshima and listened to the survivors' stories on an audio tape as I walked around. Something changed in me that day. Hearing those firsthand accounts and seeing the impact of nuclear weapons underscored the importance of our mission to prevent such devastation from happening again. It reinforced my dedication to our cause and the belief that our efforts can make a significant difference. It's also important to recognize that Indigenous veterans were not always welcome at Remembrance Day ceremonies in the past. This exclusion is a painful part of our history that we must acknowledge. Today, I am proud to see that Indigenous peoples in the Canadian Armed Forces are more recognized and honored for their service. It is essential to celebrate the diversity and contributions of all who serve, and I'm hopeful for a future where every veteran is respected and remembered. I have loved this job, even when it didn't love me back. The challenges and hardships have been many, but the sense of purpose and the honor of serving my country and its people far outweigh them. Remembrance Day is a time for all of us to reflect on the sacrifices made by those who came before us and to recommit ourselves to the values they fought to protect. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. Let us all remember and honor those who have served and continue to serve with courage and dedication. Hello.
I would like to welcome Lee Lankshire back to the mic. She's going to read In Flanders Fields in Cree.
Ota Flanders nigwahas kanek, wa wepastanwa, wa pequania. Astak bimetas kwa hegana, gana nipiste stege. Da giske nawa chitak, etaka bimisiniak. Maka gisekuk anege isuge negamochek. Benesisak e pimenachik, akawach bita kosewak. Eninakuk ema matwe wege, baskis kinana, aski. Onakataskeak ninan, namona magageas. Naki pimetesinan, naki mositanan, ga sagastik. Niki wapatinan, ga pakisamuk. Niki sagehe wanan, minan niki sagehe kaoinanan. Maka ekwa nepumisininan. Ota flanus niguahaskanek. Gina wao ekwa notinaguk, ka notinama guaguk. Eki sagochik guea, kita sonamatanan, escoteo. Openamuk ekwa gina wao. Kispin anwa heta weage, ninan ka naga taskeak. Namwach negan anwan pinan, ata e o pekige wapekwania. Ota flaners niguahaskanek.
Thank you, Lee. And to end off our ceremony today, I'm going to welcome Madeline Panask back, and she's going to do a closing prayer.
Thank you. That was a very lovely service. I'm very proud of all the young ladies and young men that spoke their Cree language today with pride. I love when I see that. But before I do my closing, I'd like to do take a moment of silence in honor of Dr. Maria Sinclair, who passed away a couple of days ago. He was one of our most prominent political leaders, one of our Truth and Reconciliation commissioners, one who was the main speaker when Truth and Reconciliation first came out. He and his two partners took 3 years to gather over 6,000 stories for Truth and Reconciliation. And this ceremonies here is a part of what he has been able to accomplish, because we are to incorporate our culture into everyday, in every aspects of Canadian society. It doesn't matter where you were, where you walk, where you work, what you do. You should be who you are and continue living your life as an Aboriginal person. No more hiding, no more trying to be hidden anymore. We are here. We are very resilient, and we're here to stay. So please bow your heads for at least 30 seconds in memory of Dr. Marie Sinclair. Thank you. For every living God, remember those whom you have gathered here from this storm of war. Into the peace of your presence, may the same peace calm our fears, bring justice to all peoples, and establish harmony along the nations throughout our Creator, our Lord. Amen. Hi, hi. Enjoy the rest of your day.